So if you couldn't tell from the music I was playing before the lesson, this morning we are starting to talk about Moses. There are two rather famous Moses movies, The Prince of Egypt and The Ten Commandments, both which are good in their own way. And I highly recommend them both, though the Ten Commandments is like 4 million years long. So, take that into consideration. Mike missed the song. What was it? So I was playing Deliver Us from the Prince of Egypt soundtrack, which is the first song. So I was playing that right before I started streaming. There's like a couple of seconds where there's no sound, but you should have been able to hear it if it's set up properly on my end, which I think it was because Trevor was able to hear it. But yes, so sorry, completely just lost my train of thought. So Moses is a very important story. There's a reason why so many movies have been made about him. If you watch The Prince of Egypt, there's a little clip at the beginning that's like, this is a foundational story to, not clip, but words. It's like, this is a foundational story to 3 major religions and stuff like that. Because the story of Moses is one of the big famous stories from the Bible. So we're going to spend about 7 weeks on it to go through the entire story. And it's not just Moses' story, as we're going to see. While Moses is a central character, kind of a main character, it's really the story of the Israelites and the Hebrews. And Israelites, Hebrews, those words are interchangeable. At this point in the Bible, usually they're going to be referred to as Hebrews. But basically, when we last left off, right, Jacob and his entire household, all of his children and their families and all of his servants and their families and all their animals, all their stuff, moved to Egypt. They moved to Egypt because there was famine in the whole world. And in Egypt, Joseph, who was Jacob's basically lost son, had ended up being second to none but Pharaoh in Egypt. He was super important. And when this famine came and as he reconciled with his brothers, he was basically like, you guys come here and live with me and be safe. And you can live here in this area of land. So, these Hebrews, they're from Canaan. They're all descended from Jacob, before him Isaac, before him Abraham. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. That's why you'll often hear them referred to as Israelites, because they're the children of Jacob, who is Israel. But like I said, at this point, Hebrew is kind of what we use, Hebrews. Basically, when we use the word Israelites or Hebrews, we mean people descended from Jacob, people descended from Israel. That is not the same as saying all the people descended from Abraham, even though Jacob is descended from Abraham, because Abraham had other sons who were not considered part of this group. Even after Sarah died, he remarried and he had many sons. So every child of Jacob, well, son of Jacob, is basically one of the 12 tribes of Israel. You will often hear the Bible refer to the 12 tribes of Israel. In the Bible later, we'll see people identify like they are a Benjamite. They are a Judite. I don't know if they said Judite. They are of Judah. So like King Saul is descended from Benjamin. King David is descended from Judah. We'll talk about tribes getting lost later when, different groups conquer Israel. But for now, everyone that is descended from Jacob lives in Egypt. They are descended also from one of Jacob's kids. So basically they could say that we are all sons of Israel. We are all descended from Jacob. But more specifically, I am descended from Jacob via Issachar. So you have all these people living in Egypt who don't identify as Egyptians. They identify themselves first and foremost as Hebrews, as God's people. They consider themselves descendants of Jacob, and they consider themselves set apart from the Egyptians. They might intermarry with the Egyptians, Joseph did. His wife was Egyptian. But even after generations, we're going to see they don't consider themselves Egyptians. They consider themselves as something apart, as a people group living in Egypt. And as we're going to see, this is going to worry the new leader, the new Pharaoh of Egypt. So today we are starting in Exodus. We are no longer in Genesis. So the second book of the Bible basically picks up right where Genesis left off, recapping that all of Israel has moved to Egypt. And then fast forwarding a bit to a time when Jacob is dead. All right, so Exodus 1, 6 through 14. Exodus 1, 6 through 14. Then Joseph died and all his brothers and that whole generation. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramesses, for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. And they were ruthless in all the tasks that were imposed on them. All right. And Mike said we just have 64 more books to go. Yeah. Fortunately, we do not hit all the books of the Bible in this class. It would be really long. We would be here for years. All right. So in this section of the there's no test. Pharaoh is afraid that because the Israelites don't view themselves as Egyptian, that basically one day they might ally themselves with one of Egypt's enemies and help overthrow Egypt from the inside. So that's not a crazy fear. There are historical examples of that kind of thing happening where a land is shared by two distinct people groups and one of those people groups help overthrow the other. But this is like the worst way to handle this. This is like the most racist way to handle this, right? Like, there's lots of ways Pharaoh could have tried. He could have tried encouraging assimilation in a way that's not... He could have made it like, look at all this stuff you can get if you become Egyptian, right? Which, it still would eradicate their way of life. So not great, but at least it would be more peaceful, right? But really, probably the best way he should have done it has been like... make himself the best ally to the Israelites that could possibly be. He could have been like, I'm going to work harder at showing the Israelites that they're our friends. I'm going to make it clear that they're an integral part of this nation and that we love and respect them. And then they'll never want to ally against us, because if somebody comes to them and says, hey, do you want to go against us, the Egyptians? They'd be like, no way, the Egyptians are our best friends. Why would we ever do that? But it's not what Pharaoh does. Instead, Pharaoh's like, instead of making them our friends so they won't want to betray us because they love us, I'm going to make their lives a living hell. Yay! This is a great plan. This always goes well. It never goes well. What Pharaoh's probably thinking here is that they're multiplying too fast. And if he makes their lives miserable, they'll slow down all this kid having business. They'll be too tired to have kids, to raise kids, to do anything. And they'll be too beaten down and tired to even think about allying with another power. This is what we call oppression. And it's not cool. Oppression is bad, right? And as we're going to see, it doesn't really work out for Pharaoh. They keep multiplying. And Pharaoh's response is to work them harder, but it doesn't stop them. The Israelites are God's chosen people, right? Like, God is flourishing them even in the midst of all of this. But even more, when somebody comes after you like this, when they're like, I'm going to make your life miserable because you are XYZ, people are going to cling to XYZ harder. They're going to be like, XYZ is so important to me because that's why you're trying to take it away, right? Like, this is the thing that makes me me. These things never work. They always backfire. They always, never. Let us learn from Pharaoh's example. No one ever learns. No, it's terrible. So Pharaoh's brilliant plan is not working. So let's see his response. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you act as midwives to the Hebrew women to see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live. It's like she shells down by the seashore. She shall live. Pharaoh's response is basically to pull aside the Hebrews' midwives. Midwives being the women who help other women have babies, who are there at the birth, right? And they're like, could you make sure that the baby boys just like coincidentally all die in childbirth? The girls can live. They're cool. This is a diabolical plan because it wouldn't necessarily have pointed back to Pharaoh. Lots of babies and women died in childbirth back then. Lots. Childbirth is a hugely dangerous thing. Women were often lucky to survive. Now, usually if you gave birth to your first kid and that went fine, often it would keep going fine. But that's not even always the case, not even today. So basically he was asking these midwives to skew the numbers so that boys just happen to have a higher rate of death, which would be weird, but probably not suspicious. And people would probably be more likely to get mad at the midwives rather than Pharaoh. However, in order for this plan to work, the midwives have to go along with it. Exodus 1:17 through 21. But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and allowed the boys to live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt with the midwives and the people. God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. So the midwives don't do what Pharaoh asked them to do. What I think is really interesting is the midwives are named. If we go back, we see their names are Shiphrah and Puah. Not very many women are named in this point of Exodus. We're going to see when we talk about the next section and we talk about Moses' mom, Moses' adopted mom, Moses' sister. They don't really get names for a while. But these women are named, and I think it's twofold. One, what they did was incredibly brave. They stood up to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, if you ever watch any of the Moses movies, he's like, I am the morning and the evening sun. Basically, Pharaoh thought of himself as God. He was the God king of Egypt. What he said went, and he got what he wanted. And if you didn't do what he wanted you to do, jail, death. I mean, we saw this in the last story with the baker and the cupbearer, right? The baker got killed. Cupbearer got to go to jail for a couple years, and then he came back. Or days. I guess he was in jail for days. But regardless, these midwives are very brave women who stood up to Pharaoh, even if they did it through subterfuge. And what's interesting is the way they did it here is like, so Pharaoh brings him and he's like, why have you done this? You're allowing the boys to live. And these women, they're smart. They play right into Pharaoh's racism. It may be hard to see, but that's exactly what they do here. They're like, these Hebrew women, they're not like Egyptian women, Pharaoh. They're just different. Hebrews are different. They're so vigorous that they give birth before the midwife even comes. This is a kind of standard racist trope between like ruling classes and servant classes, in that, the women of the ruling class are delicate. And, they need assistance, and they're so frail and fragile. While the women of the lower class are, hardy women of the earth. They don't need help. We can see this is an ancient racist trope here. But these midwives, who are Hebrews, by the way, they are trying to get Pharaoh off their back. They're trying to redirect him, right? And they know that Pharaoh is racist. So they are playing into that. They're playing into his expectations. And they're being like, oh, those Hebrew women, they have babies before we can even arrive. That's how like hardy they are. It's just crazy, you know? So, because remember, this is a time without cell phones, right? So if a woman goes into labor, you have to go run and get a midwife, which could take some time. Now, to be fair, you know, I have known women today who basically had their babies in the car because they couldn't make it to the hospital in time. So there are always women who have babies fast, and then there are women who are in labor for like 3 days. I don't really think there is a rhyme or reason to how that's decided. It just is. So these midwives are lying through their teeth, playing into Pharaoh's racism, because they're not going to kill these babies. That's just ridiculous. That goes against their job. That goes against their God. That goes against everything they want to do. And God sees these midwives and what they're doing, and he blesses them for it. These midwives who are named Shiphrah and Puah, God blesses them. So do we think Pharaoh is going to be happy about this situation? No, he's not. So Exodus 1:22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live. Basically, Pharaoh is done with the subterfuge. He's done with trying to, do it under the table. He's like, nope, we're just done. Just every baby boy, just throw him in the river. In the river. Gone with them. Yeah. So the Israelites, needless to say, are not too happy about this. Back then, a woman didn't know whether she was giving birth to a boy or a girl before she gave birth. She would be carrying this baby for 9 months with this anxiety that once she gave birth, soldiers might arrive at her door, take her baby, and throw him into the river. She would have no idea. And I mean, even if you knew, like, nobody wants their babies to be thrown into the river. This is terrible. This is not going to make the Israelites remember Pharaoh fondly and or not want to ally against his enemies. Ally with his enemies against him. This is exactly the opposite effect is what's going to happen, right? Now the Israelites are going to be like, I hate Pharaoh. I hate him. So Exodus 2:1-4. Oh, and I think I forgot to say, this is like 400 years after Joseph. So the Israelites have been in Egypt for 400 years. So they're pretty, they live here now. I don't think I said that. It's been many generations. All right. So Exodus 2:1-4. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch, and she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. You see what I mean by women not being named, right? We get a man from the house of Levi married to a Levite woman. A woman. His sister. They don't have names at this point in the story. All right. So, house of Levi just means descended from a Levite. So, from Levi, Jacob's son. So, if you are a Levite, you are descended from Levi, who is Jacob's son. So, a Levite woman had a baby who was a boy. As we all know, by Pharaoh's command, that means he's got to be thrown in the river. But she hides him. How did she hide him? I don't know. I don't know how you hide a baby, you guys. They're kind of loud. Maybe she told people her child died in childbirth. Maybe she told everyone he was a girl. I don't know. I just know for 3 months she hid him. And then at some point she couldn't hide him anymore. But she didn't want him to die. So she did something desperate. She did something crazy. She built him a basket and put him in the Nile River. Now, it says she plastered it with bitumen and pitch because that's how you make a basket watertight and float. So it doesn't immediately flood and drown the baby. Because then she'd kind of just be doing what Pharaoh commanded, right? Throw the baby in the river. But she puts him in a basket in the reeds, which is along the shore, right? And you're going to be like, oh, the shore, that's safe, right? Nothing about the Nile River is safe. I actually really love the Prince of Egypt's kind of depiction of this. It is kind of overdramatic, but the Nile River is full of life. You have crocodiles and you have hippos. Now, you might think that one of these things is more dangerous than the other. Hannah says she would have just raised the baby as a girl. Yeah, but I think at some point somebody would have changed the diaper and been like, oh, this baby seems to be of the gender that Pharaoh is trying to kill, right? It would have been very based on what was in the diaper, right? Like that's the way Pharaoh was discriminating against them, right? So even if she was like, oh no, he's totally a girl, I don't know how long that would have worked, but maybe that's what she did for 3 months. I don't know. All right. So, crocodiles are scary, but the thing about big lizards like that is that every time they go to eat something, it's a decision in their minds of like, is this a good decision or not? Because they only have so much energy. It's actually, if you ever see like crocodiles and alligators sitting around with their mouth open, it takes them a lot of energy to open their mouth. And so they sit there with their mouth open as a way to cool off. But closing it, they gotta commit. They gotta mean that that's what they want to do, because it takes so much more energy to open it again. So while crocodile would attack him, that's actually probably less likely than hippos. Hippos are mean, and hippos are violent, and hippos are territorial, and they will kill anything that comes in their path, even though they don't necessarily eat meat. They're just like, this is my area, stay out of it. And hippos can actually move fairly fast when they want to. And all of these are the kind of animals that aren't going to be in the deepest part of the Nile. They're going to be in the shallower parts. But then in the deep parts of the Nile, if Moses' basket floats over there, you're going to have like boats and ships. The Nile is basically a highway. She basically put her baby on the side of a highway. And that is a better chance for his survival than him staying home with her. This is desperation. It's a slim chance at survival, but it is a chance. Whereas him staying home is zero chance. To help her baby's chances, she sends the sister to watch him to see, partly probably because she wants to know what's going to happen to him. Is he going to get eaten? Is he going to drown? Is he going to be miraculously saved? We shall see. 1 minute. I'm going to drink some tea. Okay, so Exodus 2, 5 through 10. Exodus 2, 5 through 10. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. This must be one of the Hebrews' children, she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, I drew him out of the water. Pharaoh's daughter is bathing in the river, and she sees the basket. So she's probably got like a little section that's, her palace comes up to, that they probably try to make sure is safe. But if we have learned anything, is you actually cannot be safe from alligators and crocodiles. Don't play in the river, guys. But she sees a basket. She asks her maid to get it. And when she pulls the baby out, the baby's crying. And it's very clear here that Pharaoh's daughter immediately recognized this as a Hebrew baby. She would know the decree her father, the Pharaoh, had set down. So according to her father's own law, she should throw him back in the river and let him die to uphold her father's command. But that's not what she does. She raises him as her own son. Now, the baby's sister, who we'll later learn is named Miriam, is watching, and she is a smart cookie. She basically reveals herself at this time and is like, do you want a nurse for the baby? Because they didn't have formula back then, right? Nowadays, if you adopt a baby and you need to provide it milk, you can go to the store and you can buy formula and you can make a baby a bottle. But they didn't have that back then. The only way you could nurse a baby was from a woman. And the only women who can nurse babies are women who recently had babies. Since Pharaoh's daughter did not recently have a baby, she wouldn't be able to do this. So this concept of a wet nurse was actually fairly common, not just in the ancient world, even in the near term world. So like if your wife died, 300 years ago, you would need somebody else to help you with the baby. So Pharaoh's daughter agrees that she needs a nurse, and the sister goes and gets the baby's biological mother. So Miriam gets her own mom, and then Pharaoh's daughter pays Moses' biological mom to help raise Moses. This is brilliant. This is a conspiracy of women, and I love it. So up to this point, none of these characters have been named. Like I already said, we later learn that Moses' sister is Miriam. We later learn Moses' mother is Jochebed. But at no point is Pharaoh's daughter given a name. So she will constantly be referred to as just Pharaoh's daughter. So here at the beginning of Moses' story, Moses, one of the most powerful and important men in the Old Testament, we have three incredibly brave and courageous women who defied everything and to do what they thought was right. So Jochebed hides her baby from Pharaoh's men, and when she can no longer hide him, she trusts him to God. This is dangerous and brave. If she had tried to continue hiding him, he would have been found. It would have been an incredible act of faith to place her baby, who she didn't want to die, in that water, but also considerably brave. It would be considerably braver for her to not immediately try to take him back from Pharaoh's daughter, but to retain her composure and realize that Moses being raised as a prince of Egypt would be in his best interest. Jochebed has the bravery of a mother who realizes she cannot raise her own son, so she gives him up for adoption. Sometimes that is the bravest thing a person can do, realizing they can't provide for their own child. Holding on to Moses for herself would have led to his death. Miriam was also incredibly brave. She's a kid. She is a slave child who walked straight up to Pharaoh's daughter and suggests an audacious plan of action. One that's basically like, I'm going to bring the birth mother here to nurse this child. At best, Pharaoh's daughter might have only ignored her. At worst, Pharaoh's daughter could have had her punished for daring to talk to somebody as high-ranking and mighty as her. But Miriam still steps forward and suggests her plan. But Pharaoh's daughter was also brave and held an important place in God's plan. She took this baby out of the water, realized it was the baby of a people her own father commanded the death of. She is risking Pharaoh's ire by taking this baby in, and Pharaoh would have been completely in his rights to have her punished for defying him. You may think, oh, well, she's a woman of the ruling class, so she's fine, right? Yes and no, because a woman of the ruling class was still considered property. So Pharaoh could have taken the baby from her and had her beaten. Heck, he could have had her killed if he really wanted to. But she risks it anyway, because when faced with the reality of a crying baby, she can't go along with Pharaoh's plan. There's a lesson in here to be learned from Pharaoh's daughter. She knew before this moment that the Hebrews' babies were in danger. That's why she immediately identified this baby in the basket as a Hebrew. Who else would be desperate enough to put their baby in a river? Sometimes we hear about horrible things, like the Hebrews' babies being killed by Pharaoh, or men and women and children being murdered in other countries, but it doesn't seem real and we don't do anything about it. Pharaoh's daughter would have probably lived a very sequestered life. She'd be like, oh, those Hebrews, whoever they are, maybe she had a Hebrew servant. I don't know. But we hear about it. It seems so nebulous and academic. And so sometimes we make statements from academic standpoints because it doesn't affect us. But it's not until we see a baby crying in a basket or a person who's a refugee who's finally made it somewhere safe that we realize these people are people. They're just like us. So this disinterest in other people is called apathy, which means we don't care. And to a certain extent, we can't care about everything. That's human. Your brain is only capable of taking in so much. And the world can seem like a really terrible place. So our mind protects ourselves by saying, like, I'm not going to care about this, or I'm going to zone this out. Because it takes a lot of effort to care about everyone. However, God calls us to care about everyone. Jesus tells us we're to love our neighbors as ourselves, but he goes further than that too. If we flip to the New Testament, we see Matthew 5:43 through 47. This is from the Sermon on the Mount, and this is Jesus speaking. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Jesus calls us for a step beyond. We are to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. If someone bullies us, we're to pray for them. Not just pray for them, we're to love them. He says it's easy to love people you're close to. Everyone does that. It's hard to love those we're enemies of, and yet we are called by Jesus to do that. The kid who bullies us, we should pray for them. We should extend them grace. The kid who annoys the crap out of us, we should pray for them and love them. The person who is the opposite political party of us, we should pray for them and extend them grace and love. Pray and love. This is not easy. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it. This is so hard. It is so much easier to hate. And it is even easier to just in general be apathetic. They say that hate is not the opposite of love. Apathy is. Because caring is hard. And if you're hating something, then you're caring a lot about it. It exerts a lot of effort. I hate the movie. I hate it. Star Trek Into Darkness. Bye, Hannah. And I hate that movie because I love Star Trek so much. There are a lot of terrible movies out there that I'm just apathetic about. I don't care about. But I hate Star Trek Into Darkness because I love Star Trek so much that movie hurts me. So when you honestly care about something, your actions will reflect that. You'll find you just can't stand by when people talk bad about other people, even when it's entire people groups you don't even know. So if you hear that Pharaoh is murdering Hebrew babies, you shouldn't just sit there and think, I'm an Egyptian. This doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to care about it. You should be thinking, these poor women whose babies are being taken from them. These poor babies who aren't getting a chance to live. I can't even imagine that hurt and pain. These thoughts of sympathy, that's loving. And you should pray for them. And then you should go to Pharaoh and say, what the heck do you even think you're doing? Now, maybe you don't have the power to go to Pharaoh. So maybe you just donate money to groups actively working against Pharaoh. Maybe you join a charity. I don't know. There's ways to do things. Because our love and prayers often need to directly lead to some sort of action. Because when we really care about someone or something, we have to do something about it. If you really care about your child and they fall and skin their knee, you're not just going to be like, I'm going to love and pray from you from here. You're going to go to them. You're going to bind their knee. You're going to help fix it. You're going to kiss the boo-boo, right? We have to stand up to Pharaoh. Now, the truth is most of us are like Pharaoh's daughter. And that's not all bad. We don't know all that's going on in the world or with people. So you may not realize there's even someone you should care about until you meet that Hebrew baby in a basket. Pharaoh's daughter may not have even given a thought to the Hebrews before. Sometimes it's just the reality of being human. And that's okay. We can't be all-knowing. But you should be brave enough that when you see a baby in a basket crying, you pick it up and you risk Pharaoh's anger to raise that baby, even though it was born an enemy. When there are issues of suffering and pain that come to our attention, we are supposed to care, even if there are enemies. Love God. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. Love. This is what it means to be a Christian. So we need to learn from these brave women of Jochebed, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter, who, even though they were powerless, Jochebed and Miriam were the most powerless of the powerless. Miriam was a slave child. That's like the lowest thing that exists on the totem pole. She's a female slave child. And yet they were still brave, and they still did what was right. And we need to be like that. So that is today's lesson. That is all I have. So we will go to prayer requests. Let me stop the recording.